Okay, I've got 4 till. So I'm going to go ahead and just start talking about a couple things before we get into the meat of the presentation. Thanks for coming out on a nasty night to talk about some American history. And I think you'll, this is a presentation unlike anything I've ever done before. And so I think you'll get a lot out of this. It's an interesting character study. I want to thank Matt McCook for letting me indulge me, I guess, to come out and be able to do these kind of military heritage presentations. And then thanks for the students. Make sure you, again, if you want gear, sign up. Hey, and I want to hear what you have to say when we're all done, right? Does this make sense? Okay. Did what I say resonate? You know, those kind of things. So happy to talk to anybody at the end about this. Hey, the first thing, kind of my public service announcement, okay, is the Oklahoma Military Heritage Foundation does a great job of keeping, maintaining all of our military heritage within the state of Oklahoma. We have 2 representatives right over here, and some of the t-shirts are from them. They also have a Military Heritage Hall of Fame, Oklahoma Military Heritage Hall of Fame, and it goes back to pre-statehood, probably 1910? Go ahead.
Hall of Fame started in 1999.
Right, yeah, Hall of Fame started, but you have heritage going all the way back, way back. And so if you go down to the Oklahoma History Center, there's a kiosk down there that you can go, and they have bios and interviews. You can really get in touch with your military heritage, okay? You can also go online and kind of do your own research, and they've done a great job of kind of putting all that information in a very usable, quick to find spot. The other one here is Mission 22. By some estimates, they say that we have 22 veterans that commit suicide every day. I find that number horrendous, okay? That sort of casualty rate is worse than what we have suffered on a daily basis, in the last 40 years, 50 years, okay? And so Mission 22 specifically goes and tries to help veterans in crisis, okay? So if you're out there, if you want to contribute to a company or an organization, their hallmark is veterans, family, community, because that's how you heal these guys, okay? Find them where they are and help them out. And then there's this thing called Till Valhalla Project. Now, Till Valhalla is kind of interesting, started by some vets, and all they do is sell stuff like these t-shirts, okay? That's their latest t-shirt right up there. They've helped people with over 10,000 hours of therapy. They got $1.5 million that's been donated from Till Valhalla through all of their sales of stuff, hats, shirts, cups, stickers, whatever, okay? And then if you have a situation where there's a suicide in the family, they'll actually go out and do a memorial, because that usually doesn't happen, right? If there's a suicide in the family from a veteran, traditionally there wouldn't have been a lot of memorialization of that individual. And they're like, nope, we're going to do that, okay? And so they'll actually go out there and support the family. And it's not always just people that fall victim to suicide. There's other veterans that pass away. So they go in and do memorials with the family to commemorate that veteran. And their slogan, right, is "Do not give in to the war within," is their slogan. Okay, so we're going to get going now. Here's a statement. You can agree with it or not, right? And it says, life is best lived in the future, okay, but it's best understood in the past. Sometimes you hear like looking in the rearview mirror is 2020, right? Because you can see where everything went right, where everything went wrong, where everything went crazy. And I guess what I want to explain to people is this idea of applied history. Okay, you don't hear that very often. If this was like a law class, we'd be talking about precedent, right? Well, what's precedent, right? It's applied history. They just don't call it that, okay? And they'll go back and say, well, this is settled law from 1624, and it carries through to today. If I was to say like math, right? Applied math or historical math, you'd have what? Proofs. This is where everybody gives the hard eye roll. You're like, oh, right? But you'd have proofs. You'd go back to proofs, you'd go back to Pythagoras, whatever. There's a lineage, there's a line that goes back to where all that started. For some reason, I don't know why, we don't do that with our history. So you hear statements like, this is the worst it's ever been, right? You hear that. You will hear that phrase. Is it? No. It's not even close. Okay? So when we don't use applied history, we lose our perspective. You lose our perspective. And so that's part of what I want to grow tonight in everybody, is to have that perspective. Now, here's my challenge to you as we go through. It's like the hidden puzzle that's inside the presentation. Okay? We're going to have some understanding, like, what worldviews do you start seeing? Okay? Now, that immediately requires a definition. What's a worldview? Okay? A worldview is it's the lens that you look through into the world to interpret what's going on. Okay? That's what it is. It's like, how do I think about what's occurring around me? And then that drives how you act and react. All right? And the other one is, what are the pivots? Now, what's a pivot? There are some specific times within history where we're on this vector and we're going, and it all changes radically fast, and suddenly we're going in the opposite direction. That's a pivot. Okay? So things that happen really quickly in history that totally change how everybody thinks about their current circumstances is a pivot. Okay? So as we go a step through this tonight, right, I want you to kind of keep in the back of your mind, since we're going with this idea of applied history, okay, what worldviews do you see? And then what are the pivots? Okay? All right. So yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a day which will live in infamy. What happened? Pearl Harbor. Okay? Pearl Harbor. The Imperial forces of Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on a Sunday morning. Okay? That is, I think that's actually the Arizona. This is the Tennessee. You see all these water coming off. They're trying to keep the oil away because the oil's burning. That was the USS Shaw. So a bomb came down, penetrated the forward magazine, and you got that. Blew up the entire ship. That is Wheeler Airfield. Okay? That was an Army Air Corps field that was strafed and bombed by the Japanese Naval Air Forces. Now, here's what's interesting about this. It didn't just start on December 7th. They set sail on the 26th of November, and they kind of had an interesting route, okay, the way they went. They avoided a lot of shipping lanes. They were very, very tactical and strategic, actually, on how they got over there, such that they traveled 4,000 miles in radio silence to arrive about 230 miles north of Oahu on December 7th. 67 ships. And they're having to refuel as they go. From a military perspective, incredible how they pulled that off. Absolutely one of the best strategic and tactical military maneuvers in history. And that morning, they launched 2 waves of airplanes, completely coordinated, incredibly precise. If you know nothing about the Japanese, they are very precise. And what you had was this idea, this timeline, 183 planes take off ships at 6:10 in the morning, and about an hour and 30 minutes later, the first wave reaches Oahu. Okay? The airborne commander, and we're going to talk about him tonight, Mitsuo Fuchida, orders the attack. He says the words, Tora, Tora, Tora. which, when he made that code language come out, it was basically saying that we've caught the Navy flat. They had no resistance coming from the Navy in port at all. There were no Army Air Corps airplanes up in defense at all. At 7:55, the first wave attack begins, and then by 7:10, another 171 airplanes takes off. They attack, and by 10 o'clock, it's over. He stayed airborne. He was the first off of the Akagi. We'll talk about that in a second, but he's the first off the aircraft carrier Akagi, and he's the last to land. And you can kind of see some pictures. That's a Japanese airplane on the right, kind of going down towards Battleship Row. It's kind of hard to see. And this one's kind of hard to see too, because that right there is a Japanese dive bomber, and that's the bomb. Precise. Pearl Harbor, we had 73 ships in port, 3 battleships, complete loss. Okay? We're familiar with one of them at least, right? The Oklahoma. The Arizona was the other one. That's another one that will probably ring in your mind. You think about the USS Arizona Memorial out in Pearl. Anybody been to Hawaii, Pearl? Yeah, okay. There's 33 ships damaged, okay? We had 400 aircraft in and around Pearl, of which 169 of those were destroyed, mainly on the ground. They never got airborne. Another 159 were damaged. We had 2,400 KIA, of which 1,200 were on the battleship Arizona, one ship. 1,200 wounded. For the Japanese fleet, they had 67 ships. Remember, 67 that had gotten out there. And I actually kind of included, they had some midget subs involved as well. We'll talk about that another time. 0 damaged or destroyed. They had 353 aircraft. They only lost 29 airplanes. Incredible. Okay? They had 74 aircraft damaged on the second wave. That was basically the Americans started responding with anti-aircraft artillery. And then they had 64 KIA and they had 1 POW. Incredible, lopsided victory. I mean, it is a runaway victory on behalf of the Japanese. All right, so then you go, okay, well, who are these guys? Like, how did they do that? Right? Top guy, right up there, Admiral Yamamoto, educated in Harvard, was a naval attaché in Washington, D.C., knew the American culture exceptionally well, okay? Was interesting. The Japanese army didn't like him. They were going to assassinate him because they thought he wasn't aggressive enough. Okay? Admiral Nagumo is in charge of the carriers. Then you have, right there, that's Captain Genda. He's the planner. He's one of the planners. And the guy that we're going to talk about tonight, right there, is Lieutenant Commander Mitsuo Fuchida. And he is the airborne commander for the whole thing. He's the first off, and he's the last on. So what's his background, right? We should know something about him, a little bit. He's born December 3rd, 1902. And by the way, you can all smile when I start trying to pronounce Japanese names, okay? I've practiced, but this Iowa boy probably is not going to get every Japanese name quite right. But Nagao Nara Prefecture is kind of the cradle of Japanese civilization, okay? Mitsuo actually means number 3 boy. That's interesting, right? How'd you get your name? Well, I was the 3rd. Okay. 2 older brothers, 2 younger sisters. His oldest brother died when he was 5 years old from an accident. And Yazu and Shika Fuchida, right there, that's in 1910. That's his mom and dad. His dad was very militant, but couldn't go to the military because he had a baseball accident that resulted in him being blinded in one eye. So he's out. Very militant. His mom, though, very interesting. She is the daughter of a rebel samurai. And when the Japanese went through a civil war, and his side lost, he ran for it. People that liked that family hid her and adopted her as their own. His father is very Buddhist, and so Mitsuo has to read all the Buddhist scriptures and learn them all by rote. He has to memorize them straight out. And here's one of Mitsuo's quotes. He said, "I was still so pale, skinny, and shy that no one, not my parents, relatives, or classmates, believed I would ever become a military man." That says a lot for the guy that pulls off one of the greatest military victories in history. And he also wrote, "If I have something of a samurai in my nature, I owe it to my mother's physical discipline." His mom was tough. You'd probably have to be if you were in Japan in 1910. So, in January of 1918, he wants to go to the Naval Academy. Fail. He's underweight. Fails right out of the beginning. They don't even want to talk to him. Didn't have enough poundage. So he's all right. I'm going to keep going. March of 1918, he passes to get into the Merchant Marines, but doesn't really like it. It feels like second place to him. Okay? So he goes a year later, he goes, "Hey, I'm going to go back and I'm going to try again." And this time he passes the physical side of it, but he fails in academics, which was a shock to him because he was a really good student. Fails that. A year later, he passes both. That should give you a pretty good understanding of his mentality, of what he thinks, how he thinks. August of 1921, he enters Itajima, which is Annapolis for the Japanese, with 300 plebes. That Minoru Genda, who he then helps with the Pearl Harbor attack, is one of his classmates, or a class ahead of him. But he has a classmate called Prince Takamatsu, who is the brother of Emperor Hirohito in his class. That will become important later. He's really good. He excels in mathematics and English. The U.S. Navy is considered their highest potential enemy. And he talks about that. It wasn't out of hatred. It was just obvious. Those guys are the best. They're the ones that are going to interfere with us. They're the ones that we have to stop. So his whole focus was, that's why he chose English. He graduates in 1924, and he completes this long training cruise to San Francisco. He's hosted by the crew of the USS Maryland, which was one of the battleships that ended up getting bombed in Pearl Harbor in 1941. And for the first time, he runs aground of a very interesting racial component in California that was very anti-Asian. He'd never seen that before. And that really stuck with him for a long time. Not well received by some of the Californians of that time in 1924. But he decides, like everybody wants him to go to the regular Navy, right? Like, I want to go gunnery, navigation, submarines, whatever. He picks to go to the Air Arm. And everybody thought he was crazy. Like, that's never going to last. That's crazy, right? That's somebody's pet project. It's not going to happen. But he gets through, and he actually solos in February of 1928, and there's a picture of him. And what's interesting about the upper right, with a circle up there, that's him. One, when you look at his pictures, he's, especially when he's in the military, always serious. Man is not cracking a smile at all. So he is driven and he is focused. The other interesting thing about him is, of all of the pilots that are up there in the upper right, he's the only one that makes it out of World War II. And as things happen, he gets married. So Haruko and Mitsuo get married in January 7th of 1931 after a stunning 3-week engagement. 3 weeks. Okay? And we'll talk about some of the books later, but you read about how the process went. We do it a lot differently today. I'll just tell you. And as would happen in 1938, he has a daughter, Mayeko, and then his son is Yoisha. Now, Kokotai no Hongai, March of 1937, this comes out. Remember I said keep an eye out for worldviews? Okay, keep an eye on this. It's 156 pages. This is the translation, called The Cardinal Principles of National Essence of Japan. It's published by the Japanese Ministry of Education, and the actual translation is the Bureau of Thought Control. Now, When we hear that, we'd be like, what? They accepted it. That was the translation. Required reading for all teachers and students from middle and high school. And then it went out from there. And it specifically talks about the divine origin of the imperial family. So we're moving the emperor from just a guy, important person, to a deity. It defines the duties of a loyal subject to their ruler as defined by Shintoism. Okay, I'm going to talk about that in a second. And the purpose of why this was there was to overcome social unrest and to develop a new Japan. It's for our good. This is for your good. Everybody picking up on the worldview there? It taught people to put nation before self and that they were part of the state and not separate from it. So you as an individual were just an extension of the state. You were a tool within the larger state. Here's some quotes. The unbroken line of emperors receiving the oracle of the founder of the nation reigns over the Japanese empire eternally. His Majesty, that's the emperor, set forth the great policy of returning to the spirit of ancient times, which has had its nucleus the emperor, who is a humanly manifested deity in keeping with the great significance of the God-handed founding of the empire. Okay. Loyalty means to revere the emperor and follow him implicitly. The land of Japan stands high above the other nations of the world, and her people excel all the peoples of the world. In other words, we're starting to watch kind of a master race start developing out of that worldview. And this is why I brought this in here. It says, our imperial forces have a duty to make our national prestige greatly felt within and without our country. No kidding. How are they going to make it felt? How their national prestige is going to be felt is to preserve the peace of the Orient in the face of the world powers and to preserve and enhance happiness of mankind. While they're doing that, while this is coming out, they're invading China. It's their duty to create peace in Asia by conquering Korea and China. Warrior spirits work inseparably from the spirits of peace. It is in subduing those who refuse to conform to the magnificent influence of the emperor's virtues that the mission of our imperial military forces lies. In other words, you either choose to do what the emperor says, or you'll be forced to do it by the military. And that was the military's focus right there. So pre-Pearl Harbor, that's the mindset that everybody going out to Pearl Harbor had. Right? So when we look at the Pearl Harbor as a sneak attack, which it was, they don't see it that way at all. They see it as a natural extension of what they're there to do. In fact, Mitsuo will be quoted later as saying, either if you're not smart enough, strong enough, or on alert enough to protect yourself, then I can take what I want. So Fuchida's responsibility is going to organize, train, and equip and lead the Combined Fleet Air Group, all of it. He builds the tactics to accommodate the harbor water depth. So Pearl Harbor is shallow, so they couldn't use a regular torpedo because it would get stuck in the mud. And here you see them doing a walkthrough of Battleship Row right there. That was a mock-up that they used to visualize what was going to happen. Pretty good, actually. And then Genda says, Fuchida had a strong fighting spirit, his best quality. He was also a gifted leader with the ability to understand any given situation and to react quickly. He got along well with people, here's a good one, and commanded the respect of his subordinates and superiors. So right before they're supposed to take off, he's given a hachimaki, which is this thing right there, that band, from all of his maintenance crews. The enlisted guys who couldn't go with him wanted to give him something so they would be with him in the fight. And right there in front of him, he puts that on and says, I'm taking you with me. Okay? He also wore his long underwear because it was cold at altitude. He made sure that he had red underwear on. Now, why would we want to talk about that, right? But he was worried that he was going to get shot. And so when he got back to the aircraft carrier and pulled out of his airplane, he didn't want anybody seeing any blood because he thought that it would destroy their morale, that it would take away their fighting spirit. So he fully expected to not walk away from Pearl Harbor unscathed. So he wears red underwear so nobody can tell if he's bleeding or not until they get him hustled away and hidden away. And there's the result. Mindset, skill, target. And again, we saw that. So post Pearl Harbor attack, he's the first off the Akagi and he's the last return. He actually goes out and guides 2 other lost aircraft back to the fleet. Okay? So there was a couple dudes, and again, you're talking about 230 miles of open ocean to try to find a moving fleet. That's an impressive piece of airmanship. He had 2 guys that got lost, so he guided them back. And this was Admiral Yamamoto's quote. Now he's not with the fleet at this time. He's back by Japan. He says, "I listened on the radio during the whole attack. I heard your order, all forces attack. When I heard that, I needed no report to tell me that the attack would be successful." That's how much Yamamoto believed in Fuchida. And then he does something really, really interesting. He presents Fuchida a painted kakimono, which is it's like a scroll. It's very, very special, and he painted it. And he wrote on it, "Message of attack reaches my ears from more than 3,000 miles away, a message from Hawaii, thinking of flight leader Fuchida's brilliant action in the early morning of 8 December, because he's in Japan, right? So International Daylight, 8 December, so writes Isoroku Yamamoto." And the head of the Japanese Navy hands this very ceremonial scroll to Lieutenant Commander Fuchida. Incredible. Doesn't happen. But then more happens. Emperor Hirohito, remember what we said, this guy is deity, invites Fuchida to come into his personal office and sits down. He's only supposed to talk for 15 minutes, okay? And by the way, he doesn't talk. He just answers questions. I mean, when God speaks, right, you just answer, okay? It ends up being a conversation for 30 minutes. Emperor Hirohito doesn't even really talk to Nagumo, who was the admiral. Doesn't really, Yamamoto's in there as well. It's all focused on Fuchida, okay? And he wants to know specific things like, did you shoot down any civilian aircraft? Were there any hospital ships bombed? How many aircraft did we lose? And so there's now a map that Mitsuo Fuchida drew that was being used to describe. Everything was hand drawn. It's in the Library of Congress. It was bought for $420,000 in 2013, and then it was given to the Library of Congress. Okay, so Mitsuo Fuchida has now had his personal 30-minute opportunity to sit with God. So 1942 happens. And by the way, there's so much Pacific War history that you guys could go through and talk about. We're not going to have all the time in the world. I recommend you go out and talk and learn and figure out more. On 19 February, Fuchida leads the first 2 waves of 188 aircraft in against Darwin, Australia. The Japanese Army and Navy are having their way in the Pacific. On 5 April, Fuchida leads another series of air attacks against the Royal Navy that Churchill actually said, this is the gravest threat we've faced. Now, I'm like, wait a minute, 1942, like, it's the Blitz. Like, you were actually getting bombed, right? Then in April of 1942, you have the Doolittle Raid. And we're not going to go into a whole lot of detail right now, but understand that we, the Army Air Corps, took some Army airplanes, launched them off of the USS Hornet, and bombed Japan for the first time and blew everybody's minds. The United States reached out and actually touched Tokyo and kinetically, okay? Got them. Never happened. Completely upset all the order within the Japanese hierarchy. Then there's the Battle of Coral Sea. We'll talk about that later. And then as 1942 goes on, in response to the Doolittle raid, they've decided to attack Midway. They've got to get the U.S. Navy out because they never really thought that the U.S. Navy could touch Tokyo without them, or Japan without them knowing about it. But we did. Pivot. Massive pivot in mindset and organization. But on the 27th of May, Mitsuo is diagnosed with acute appendicitis. And they're like, hey, we're going to evacuate you, to a cruiser or something. He's like, no, not going to go. I'm staying on the Akagi. The Akagi, there's a picture of it. The Akagi is my ship. You can do it right here. The doc's like, okay. Like, this is the hero of Pearl Harbor. This is the guy that had a 30-minute sit down with God, and you want me to operate on a ship that's moved? Okay. And he also says, hey, and you're not going to give me a general anesthetic. You're only going to give me a local. I don't know what the doc was thinking, but I'm going to guess he was fairly nervous through that whole situation. He comes through the surgery fine. On 4 June, the flight surgeon removes the stitches, and he can actually get up and move around. And he will not stay in sick bay because he wants to be up on the flight deck where all the guys that he's trained, that he's organized, that he's led, are about ready to take off for Midway. And again, lots of lines on the graph. Point being is, Midway turns into an unmitigated disaster, okay, for the Japanese. We end up sinking 4 of their aircraft carriers. We lose one, the Yorktown, which is a good story again, for another time. But at this point, Commander Fuchida is now up on the flight deck of the Akagi and witnesses a dive bombing attack where 3 dive bombs came at the Akagi. First one misses, and he says, okay, the guy right behind him is going to adjust because he saw where the first one landed. Second guy is going to do it. It comes down, hits the elevator, busts the elevator up, but that doesn't do any real damage. And then he watches the third one come down and hit into the forward magazine. Now, what you need to know about Midway is, uncharacteristically, there's fuel, and there's bombs, and there's torpedoes all over inside the flight deck, unsecured, and in non-flame, or like in non-flame retardant areas, okay? And it lights the whole Akagi up. He actually gets blown off the flight deck, breaks both his legs from the concussion, and he's severely burned. And he's actually relates in his book about how he was watching his clothes starting to smolder. And he's like, this is it. If I have to die, I'm dying for my country. I'm fine with that. 2 enlisted guys find him, put him in a net, lower him down to this passing kind of boat that had already left to take some of the other commanders away, and they get him over to a cruiser. So he's actually evacuated. But he doesn't allow himself to have any, they were going to immediately take care of him, right? He doesn't allow it. He's like, put me in the officer's wardroom, which was kind of like a conference room. And he stood there, he was there for 3 days while they were working on everybody else that had been wounded. Battle of Midway, we have 48 ships in the fleet. We have the 1 aircraft carrier destroyed, which is the Yorktown. We have one destroyer destroyed. Out of 360 aircraft, we had 150 aircraft destroyed. There is a great story about how the Navy conducted Midway and the bravery associated with the Navy crews at Midway. But we had 307 KIA. They had 82 ships in their fleet, 4 aircraft carriers. Their main line aircraft carriers were all sunk. 1 cruiser destroyed, 264 aircraft that they had, they lost 248 of them. And worse yet, they lost 3,057 KIA, which was their main line of trained individuals to run the war. They lost pretty much all of their experience and all of their pilots. So, pivot. The Japanese don't get in, this is the high water mark for the Japanese. From this point on, they are no longer an aggressive state. They are being pushed. And the United States Navy takes the initiative in the Pacific. And this is how far out they were in 1942. And the only reason I share that is from that point on, everything between MacArthur and Nimitz is pushing everything towards the Japanese home islands. So from 1942 to August of 1945, we're going to jump over a whole bunch of stuff. He's hospitalized, recovering from home. He spends a year in casts and recovery, burns, everything. His wife takes care of him, which he's very fortunate because he got out of the military hospitals and was able to go home and be cared for by his wife. Meanwhile, remember I said all these things are starting to push towards the home islands. Guadalcanal happens, Guam happens, Iwo Jima happens. Names that you should be generally familiar with. Battle of the Philippines happens. And then we have the Battle of Okinawa. And every time we start going along this path, the battles get bigger, more complicated, and more deadly all the way. To the point that the Battle of Okinawa is the largest sea, air, land battle in military history. And here's the interesting thing. Generally speaking, we don't know anything about it. We don't know anything about it. Why? Well, VE Day happened. So everybody focused on victory in Europe. And FDR died. And everybody was sad about FDR passing, and now we have Truman. While the Battle of Okinawa is taking place. Some of the most brutal fighting ever. If you want to read a good book, there's a guy by the name of E.B. Sledge. Wasn't supposed to keep a diary while you're on Okinawa because if someone got you, right, if you were captured, you didn't want all your notes taken, right? Mr. Sledge broke that rule, and he has an outstanding book of the account of Okinawa, and it's horrifying. So now, what you have now is we've lost all of our pilots. We're getting pushed back. So Japan has to turn to the kamikaze, which fits, remember what I read about their worldview, which fits their worldview. And I want to read this real fast. It says that this is Mitsuo speaking. The choice of suicide planes as a weapon was as logical from a Japanese point of view as was the ill-fated stand of the Spartan handful at Thermopylae. By training and indoctrination, the Japanese soldier was imbued with the belief that he could expect nothing but death on the battlefield. That fits with what I was talking about before for the mindset. They expected to die. Where American commanders persistently and wisely reiterated the fact that only a relatively small portion of men would be killed or wounded, and that the odds were in their favor. In other words, if you were wounded, we're going to get you out of here, right? We're going to save you. Okay? If you're left behind, we're going to come get you. The Japanese Articles of War taught that life rather than death was the exception. Thus, the concept of suicide planes was inevitable. Subnote, it drove everything of how they ran a battlefield. It wasn't just about airplanes, it was how they approached suicide, people running into people, like with suicide grenades with them, right? It drove everything that they did. And for that, thus the concept of suicide planes was inevitable, and for that reason it was surprising when captured Japanese pilots and others calmly and dispassionately stated that a suicide dive was merely an assignment as such and hardly distinguishable from that of reconnaissance or air attack. That is so contrary to what our worldview is as Americans. So when we see a suicide plane, we're like, that's horrible. We're shocked. It shocks us. To them, it was just another sortie. It's a day that ends in Y. On 18 October, he was interrogated as captain now. He'd made captain. It says he estimated that approximately 900 kamikaze aircraft were expended during the Okinawa campaign. His belief that, although it had been widely publicized that 400 planes had been successful in their suicide attacks, he thought probably only 200 had actually been successful. So the Ministry of Information was juicing the stats to their benefit. But that was Okinawa. And that's what the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Army was thinking about. Okay, once Okinawa has been captured, are we really going to invade the home islands? Are we really going to do that? So Operation Downfall was the invasion of the home islands. It was going to go for another 2 years. We expected at least 267,000 dead and MIA. Evacuated and wounded, somewhere over 500,000. Incredible numbers. Mind-blowing numbers that today we can't even begin to fathom. Admiral Nimitz headquarters said, his quote was, it's going to cost 500 to 750,000, perhaps 1 million lives to end this war. That was coming from Admiral Nimitz's headquarters. The Japanese casualty estimates were 6.2 million. So we get this. 5 August 1945, Mitsuo Fuchida is in Hiroshima. He's attending a conference on how they're going to defend the home islands. They're trying to organize what air bases they're going to put people at, where's the fuel going to be, who's going to be a kamikaze, who's not. And he gets a call, and he's recalled to the Navy headquarters at Yamato. And on 6 August, little boy drops. And we have the first nuclear bomb detonation over Hiroshima. 90,000 to 166,000 killed. Those are the two pictures of it. The one is from the airborne, and then the other one is from the ground. On 7 August, the Japanese Navy orders him back to Hiroshima for a bomb damage assessment. So he walks right into Hiroshima. Okay? Walks right in with 71 other people. They're crawling over everything, trying to figure out what happened. They don't even believe it's really an atomic bomb yet. They spend 3 days in the radioactive rubble. Every one of those 71, except him, die from atom bomb disease, radioactivity, cancer. He does not. He does not. He lives till 1976. Never suffers any action any health problems resulting from Hiroshima. His quote was, "It was like an evil nightmare." No kidding. He talks about there was nothing green left. Everything was fire and black. And he attempts to start convincing the authorities to accept peace, which is a major, major hurdle for him to get over from a mindset perspective. Another pivot. First time we used a nuclear weapon. So how we think now about warfare just shifted hard. He's also pivoting hard. But they don't believe it. So on 9 August 1945, Fat Man gets dropped. Nagasaki, 60,000 to 80,000 are killed. He then calls out, reinforces a call for peace. Like, we gotta stop this because we don't know where this ends, right? Now we're just trying to save Japan, anything from Japan. And the Soviet Union declares war on Japan. That infuriated him to no end. In fact, even much later, he's quoted. He was like, the Soviet Union was picking the bones. Russia was only waiting for the best opportunity, knowing Japan would have to surrender. Everybody was angry with Russia for doing such a cowardly act. He called them a thief at the fire. What that means is all of their homes were made of wood and paper and different pieces, right? And so what would happen is if a house went up, it went up fast. And a looter would come in and try to get stuff out of to take and steal. And it was like the lowest form of insult to be called a thief at the fire, to be considered a looter that was taking advantage of your neighbors losing their home. So on 10 August 1945, this is Mitsuo's quote. It said, "That was war. If Japan had had the atomic bomb, we would have dropped it on the United States." In 1959, he said to Tibbets, who was the commander of the Enola Gay that dropped the first one on Hiroshima, he said, quote, "You did the right thing. You know the Japanese attitude at that time, how fanatic they were. They'd die for the emperor. Every man, woman, and child would have resisted that invasion with sticks and stones if necessary. Can you imagine what a slaughter it would have been to invade Japan? It would have been terrible. The Japanese people know more about that than the American public will ever know." So, every August, when war protesters break out and they point at Hiroshima, the guy that actually lived it, the guy that actually walked through it, the guy that understood, said to Paul Tibbets, "You did the right thing." And he quoted again, "War is always unfortunate and evil, but once it breaks out, the only way to fight it is all out." That's how both Japan and the United States fought. He had tremendous respect for the United States Navy, for their courage, for their bravery, going all the way back even to how fast they recovered and started shooting down airplanes at Pearl Harbor. So surrender happens. On 15 August, Hirohito announces unconditional surrender. A whole bunch of people don't believe it. Why? Because they have the worldview that he's God and we don't surrender. But Mitsuo Fuchida goes with Hirohito's, remember Takamatsu? And they stop a coup that we're going to overthrow. They thought that Hirohito had been corrupted. Okay? And they didn't want to, they stopped the guerrilla war from happening. It was like surrender and we're done. Incredible amount of suicides in the Japanese armed forces at that time. But what's interesting, again, mindset. The last Japanese soldier surrendered in 1974 in the Philippines. He fought in the Philippines until 1974, right? Almost 30 years later. This guy is going around the Philippines conducting operations on his own. That tells you the amount of inspiration that he had from the emperor. And then on 2 September, they have a ceremony on board the USS Missouri. And what you see here is that's Captain Fuchida now in the upper right, and that is Nimitz signing. And right behind him is MacArthur. And then right next to him is Bull Halsey. And you can do some research on those guys another time. Well worth your time, though. And this is what Mitsuo writes. "Since I was not an official attaché, I watched the signing ceremony from the upper deck along with the crew of the USS Missouri. I don't know how he pulled that off because I can't imagine a Japanese officer just wandering around the USS Missouri, but we'll take him at his word. Later, representatives of the Soviet Union signed, 'Their victor's pride offended me. We never gave in to you,'" that was his quote back to the Soviet Union. "The only reason we lost the Pacific War was simply because we could not match the task force fleet of Admiral Halsey, who is standing next to you. I found myself clenching my fists in anger." That's his view of the Soviet Union. Okay, so the war's over. Okay? Again, major pivot. It all stops. In November of 1945, he's demobilized, right? So he's mustered out of the military, and he returns home. And he's dejected, no kidding. Today, we talk about things like PTSD. I can't imagine what he had going through his head at any given time for the things that he'd seen. He has a very meager existence. There's not like a severance package for him, right? There's no retirement. So he starts over as a farmer. Do you know how much he knows about farming? Nothing. He got a book. Okay? And he builds a house from scratch. And when I mean scratch, is I don't mean he went and found some 2x4s at Home Depot. He went and built his home from scratch. His wife's grandfather, as part of the marriage, had given them a forest, little acreage of forest. And there were a bunch of trees that had survived, chopped down the tree, and they cut the trees and made a house. What's interesting about it, his 2 kids at this time have really great things to say about their experience because dad's home, war's over, and we're having fun on the farm. So the kids' experience were completely different than what he remembers. But he's shunned by the local society, kind of almost like a war criminal. Like where before he was this incredible hero, celebrity, they don't want anything to do with him now. But he's required to testify at war crimes trials. And this sets off something in him. It makes him angry, okay? Because he's kind of like, this is just Victor's justice, right? Like you were doing the same thing to us that we were doing to you. Why are we going through these war crime trials? So, in the spring of 1947, he's convinced that the U.S. has treated the Japanese POW the same as the way we treated the POWs. Now, I'd encourage you to go look at what a Japanese POW looks like. It's horrific. Okay? Horrific. But he's convinced that we treated their guys the same way that they treated us. So he's going to bring evidence. He's going to go gather evidence, and he's going to walk it in the next time he's called to testify in these war crime trials. So he meets a group of returning Japanese POWs, and he finds his former flight engineer they thought was dead at Midway. But they had gotten into a rescue boat and had gotten picked up and taken to Utah in a POW camp. Kazuo Kanagaski. Anyway, and he tells him something that blows Mitsuo's mind. They weren't tortured or abused at all. This woman named Peggy Koval served them, shocked them, couldn't believe it. Her missionary parents were killed by Japanese soldiers in the Philippines, and yet here she was serving the soldiers that had taken her parents. In the Bushido Code, revenge was a responsibility. There was no choice. If someone killed your family, you went and killed them. It was a responsibility. It wasn't a question of whether you were going to do it or not. It was a responsibility to restore honor to the family. So this absolutely blows Mitsuo's mind. Incredibly. Okay? So he's like, this becomes an obsession to him. He needs to understand why this would ever happen in the first place. So in the fall of 1948, he's passing by the statue. Now, this is important. He's passing by the statue of Hachiko in Tokyo. That's a dog statue. There was a dog statue in Tokyo because this owner had died, and the dog would meet the owner at the subway every day. And when the owner died, the dog kept coming for 9 years to the same spot to wait for the owner. That dog is revered in Japanese culture. And he gets a pamphlet from Jacob de Cesar. Jacob de Cesar was a Doolittle raider who crashed in China and was taken prisoner. And he wrote a pamphlet that's called I Was a Prisoner of Japan. And he told his whole story of being tortured, imprisonment, but he had, in that worst of times, he has what he calls awakening of God. And so Mitsuo gets that pamphlet, and he's like, what is this? This is crazy. Again, here's a guy trying to invest in the Japanese society that imprisoned and tortured him. It makes no sense. In September of 1949, Mitsuo takes the plunge, and he reads the Bible. Can't put it down. And he becomes a Christian. Shocking. That's a pivot. We went from all the Shintoism that occurred and the worship to the emperor, and now we've completely changed 180 to becoming a Christian. And in May of 1950, Fuchida and de Cesar, they meet for the first time. They become friends. Fuchida creates the Captain Fuchida Evangelical Association that's headquartered in Seattle, of all places. He speaks full time from that moment on of his conversion to the Christian faith in the presentation titled From Pearl Harbor to Calvary. Tells the whole story. And then what really interestingly happens is in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, he goes around the United States everywhere. He's on the Merv Griffin show. Now, here's the deal. Who knows what the Merv Griffin show is? There you go. Right. That was the Tonight Show, or that was, give me another one, like a Colbert, right? Back in the day, right? Merv Griffin is interviewing Mitsuo Fuchida, the Japanese hero of Pearl Harbor, the guy that we absolutely hated. The day that will live in infamy is being interviewed on national television by Merv Griffin. He also becomes friends. This right here is Jimmy Doolittle. Jimmy Doolittle and Mitsuo Fuchida strike up a very professional relationship. Doolittle led the Doolittle raid. Okay? He ends up becoming very good friends with Billy Graham. He goes over and has tea with Admiral Nimitz. Has him over to his house. In fact, there's a great story about they were debating whether they should cut down a tree or not. Mrs. Nimitz said no. Admiral Nimitz said yes. Mitsuo Fuchida broke the tie. He goes and has dinner with Raymond Spruance, who was another admiral in the Pacific. He ends up sitting with Douglas MacArthur, and when you read the interchange, as Mitsuo writes it, MacArthur kind of like confessed all the ways that he kind of messed up the occupation of Japan and how he wished he would have done it better. Bizarre. Okay? So this guy then inserts himself in the 50s, 60s, and 70s after having commenced the day that would live in infamy to become part of American culture. Fascinating. Okay? Now, here's your takeaway. Somehow, human nature resonates with this redemptive or redemption narrative. Okay? It just does. Like, look at all the movies. Like, the reason I even brought this up, right, was the Winter Soldier, okay? Right? What's the deal with Winter Soldier, right? He's a good guy, he's friends, he becomes a bad guy, and then he comes back. It's a redemptive story. Star Wars? Oh my goodness. Okay? If I could keep George Lucas out of my house, okay? But think about all the stuff that's in Star Wars. Han Solo comes back at the end, right? Darth Vader, right? Becomes good again. What? How'd that work, right? In the middle. Lando Calrissian. Somebody else, help me out, right? I'm throwing some Star Wars terms out here, but you see what I'm saying? The Magnificent Seven, if we want to go back to the Westerns, all bad guys who become good guys to make a stand against some other bad guys. Fascinating movie. Should be required watching for your class. Top Gun. Maverick. He's rubbing the dog tags. Talk to me, Goose. Right? Oh, Maverick's re-engaging. Yay! And he comes back in, right? Same way on the Top Gun Maverick. Same deal. There's something about the redemptive story that resonates with us. And what's really interesting about it, right? If you go to Psychology Today, there's a whole list of how important the redemptive story is because we identify it with unique ways. Because what we see in ourselves is the possibility of us, of how we become better than what we were. And then we got the Bible, the ultimate in redemptive story, right? The ultimate in redemptive story. Peter absolutely betrays Jesus, right? And is redeemed after Christ is risen from the dead. So here's the interesting thing, though. All that stuff up there, it's all fiction. We like it, okay? And I've said this before. It's like a Twinkie, right? It's like entertainment, right? Tastes good. Seems like it'll be all right. Eat too many Twinkies, man. You're going to get sick. Everything above the Bible, Twinkie, okay? Mitsuo Fuchida is real. You've got to understand why with him. Why did he think that way? Have a resolution of perspective, right? And embrace this idea of applied history. Why did he do what he did from the very beginning? And what can we learn from him? Well, first thing is, like at Pearl Harbor, nobody ever saw the other ships. The only thing that ever hit Pearl Harbor was the airplanes. Everything else was beyond the horizon. How do we apply that to today? I don't know, but the way that we've been fighting a war over the last 80 years probably isn't going to be how we fight the next one. And if you look in Ukraine, there's a good example of that, right? $1,000 drones taking out a $10 million tank. Impressive. That's what I mean by pivots and change and learning from history. Hey, listen, some history is more important than others. That's what I was trying to say. There's massive pivots that are occurring right now in terms of military current, military history. You can apply it. You can see it. Okay? And there's real people that sacrifice to secure and defend freedom. I talked about the guy that ran the day that will live in infamy. We didn't talk about like Lieutenant Commander Dick Best at Midway. We didn't talk about him. There's thousands of guys in the Pacific War that we could go pluck and talk for a month of Sundays in here about their bravery and their courage under incredible circumstances. So that's up to you. You guys need to go learn that. Battles fade, okay? But their words remain. That's why we have books. That's why I like Mitsuo. He wrote everything down. You don't have to guess what he's thinking. He wrote it down for us. We can read it. Hey, and here's this Orwell quote. I don't like George Orwell. Don't like him. He freaks me out a little bit, okay? But it says, he's right. It says, those who control the present control the past, and those who control the past control the future. Because when you look at the past, it's how you envision the future. Remember what I said? Life is best lived in the future, but it's best understood in the past, okay? And there's a lot more inspiration and a lot more lessons to be learned out there. The Pacific War has thousands of people that you can go learn about. And they're over at the Oklahoma Military Heritage Foundation. Hey, listen, those are my sources. The one that's in the upper left is probably the newest. So that's the one that's going around right now, the most contemporary. What's interesting is the top 3 by Gordon Prang. He interviewed Mitsuo Fuchida. So Mitsuo was helping the United States Navy Historical Office gather all the information because he wanted it written down. He wanted the history held onto and to have the Japanese point of view preserved. So Gordon Prang wrote the top 3 that are up there. This is written by Mitsuo directly, and then the far one over there for that one day is his personal memoirs. The other ones are by Jacob de César, and then that's the book that Mitsuo Fuchida also was talking about, From Pearl Harbor to Calgary. If you go online, I'm telling you, all you got to do is put in Mitsuo Fuchida, and you will have tremendous amounts of information and videos to watch. Hey, here's a couple other ones that I've done previously. They're out there. The videos are out there. That one's out there. All right. I have 858. That is the real Winter Soldier. Questions. Give me some questions. Thanks, Bush. Give me something. I've stunned him into silence. You made it through.
Well, I'm still curious on Kelly's topic. How did he affect our future strategies and military? I mean,
Oh, how did he do it?
like, I didn't read anything.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing about him is he saw the change in the airplane where nobody else did. And so the airplane became the primary offensive weapon. Everybody that was into battleships was like, oh, it's great for reconnaissance, right? Or weather observation or whatever. They never saw it as an offensive weapon until Yamamoto put him together for Pearl Harbor. What's really interesting about it is after Pearl Harbor, even the Japanese went back to their battleships. Like they thought that it was an incredible victory, but there were three aircraft carriers that weren't hit at Pearl Harbor. They were at sea. One was in San Diego, one was at Wake, and the other one was like over by the Philippines. They were 500 miles away. And so while they were really awesome, we hit the battleships. In the end, that's not what decided the war. And even Nimitz said, I thought it would come down to this massive battleship fight, and the airplane changed all of that, okay? To include then when you look at the end of the war, what delivered the bomb that ended Japan's fight? It was an airplane. My point to that is nobody saw that coming. Pearl Harbor, they had brought everybody in close because they were way more worried about sabotage occurring around than they ever were concerned about having to do air defense. So whatever we think, like the way that war was, like it radically changed how they think. And I'm telling you, we fought the same way for the last 80 years. Like we like to have an aircraft carrier, okay? It's show of force. It'll be the first thing that goes to the bottom of the ocean if we ever get into a real one, right? And so the way that we think about warfare is going to radically, we're in the middle of a change right now. Yes, sir.
As you're was in the United States in the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Yes.
Was he no longer loyal to Japan? Was he no longer trying to spread Christianity in Japan? Why was he here doing everything in the United States?
So, two things. Yes, he was trying to spread Christianity within Japan, but his main source of funding was mainly the United States. Um, and so that's where you got like Billy Graham. So he would go, he ended up with dual, I didn't even talk about this, he ended up with dual citizenship. He was a United States citizen, which still, who signed off on that gig, right? This guy was the guy that was the lead for December 7th. Anyway, so he ends up going back and forth between the United States and Japan. And what's interesting is, like, radioactivity didn't kill him. Appendicitis didn't kill him. The Akagi getting sunk didn't kill him. His aircraft had like 46 holes in it from Pearl Harbor. That didn't kill him. Diabetes, and his wife actually thought he was eating too much meat. So they grew all their own potatoes and stuff. So what was he eating a lot of? Carbs, starches, all that stuff. So diabetes is the thing that ended up killing him in 1976. 73? I got to do my math. Yeah. Oh yeah, he did. And I think he saw like the opportunity, like he went around the world. He went to Poland, Finland. He actually would directly confront any communists. Like there were a lot of communist sympathizers that were in Europe, in the United States. Like he would directly confront them and the error of that thinking, like directly. And he used his own personal experience. Like, this is what I did and it was wrong. Don't fall into the same trap that I fell into. Yeah, he's pretty interesting.
So Greg, you said that he was shunned locally after the war.
Yep.
Did that change over time?
Oh yeah, it did. I mean, I think what they thought at the time was like here's the guy. Like it's how you would think, right? Here's the guy that started this thing. Do I want to be friends with the guy that lit this whole fuse off on December 7th? So he went from celebrity to like, whoa, there's these war crime trials taking place. Maybe I'll just separate myself from him. And so over time, then that subsided. And he did get he writes about how he had people that were not pleasant to him in the United States as a result of Pearl Harbor. But he also had people that said, my son died at Pearl Harbor and I want to support you because this is how I move on, through forgiveness and what you're doing. So, sir.
You mentioned the Magnificent Seven. That was actually based on Seven Samurai.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
And they're both true stories.
I was trying to think of some other Westerns where you see this redemption. So like Unforgiven's another one, right? You see this guy who's bad, who then ends up doing good things. I mean, there's something, we like that underdog story. It's a narrative that we like. Story. Yep. All right, I got 8:05. If anybody thinks of a question, I'll hang out here for a little bit and we can talk. We're going to give away these T-shirts before it gets much later. Here's my daughter, Mary. Which ones? All right, first one up, Phyllis Carlton. There you go. That kind of fits our theme. It's the Peggy Koval theme. All right, number 2. Where are we at here? Oh, Sophie Gosen. Okay, so I've got, it's a Ariel Scott? Is that you? Excellent. Okay, now listen. We got sizes now, right? So we got, I don't know what size you, here we go. And you're back here with the other Scots. Was that just by chance?
That was chance.
Hey, how about that? Help her. All right. Marianne Heim. Sweet. All right. Let's see. Okay, we basically have XLs. Ready? Oh, bad throw. Okay. No, it's all right. John Caleb. All right, you gonna run it? Thank you, John. Okay, so Kelly, I'm gonna guess you don't need one of these.
Somebody else.
Okay. Ken Reasoner. Yeah. Show up, get gear. There you go. That one. Okay. And 29 is Lincoln Scott. There you go. Okay, now this one, I think we're gonna have to work on a size with that one. I don't know, that one's a little small. Yeah, who's got a small friend? All right, we'll hook you up. Go ahead. All right. Any final questions for me tonight? Hey, thanks for coming out on a really blustery night to let me talk about Mitsuo Fuchida. And again, remember, applied history, okay? Take something you learned tonight, try to think about it, apply it to yourself so that it becomes part of who you are, all right? Thank you. Good night.